out of the ordinary insights. Brought to you by Investec Specialist Bank.
I'm speaking to Jeff Nemeth. He is the CEO and President of Ford Southern Africa. Jeff, you're also President, as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, of the American Chamber of Commerce in South Africa.
That's correct.
What is your engagement with other American companies that are operating within this economic environment? Are they experiencing the same challenges?
Yeah, we did a survey recently we've got about 500 member companies, and about 100 of them answered the survey. They were the big 100, I'd have to say, the top 100, our version of the Fortune 100. And their response, we asked them, what are your biggest challenges? And they said skills development, number one, and number two, access to the continent. And access from the standpoint of infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't only mean roads, rail, and ports, but it also means regulatory infrastructure, government processes, automated clearinghouses, the bankability of projects because of predictability and all of the work that has to go in before the project is approved and goes to the multinational board for approval. The risks are great because of the lack of information and the lack of infrastructure.
Has there been an improvement to this point in terms of the general experience of the CEOs on the ground, or are we still just stuck in the same quagmire?
Yeah, well, this is one of those situations where progress seems to be glacial. It's very slow, but it's encouraging.
At least there's a lot of talk about it.
There's talk about it, there's focus on it, there's focus on transparency, there's focus on good governance, there's focus on infrastructure development. But the problem is, one of the problems is the continent's not homogeneous, right? Take banking, for example. You've got the South African banking system, which is consistently
ranks among the top in the world.
Among the top 5 in the world in governance, process, balance sheets, strength. But then you go to Algeria, for example, the economy, large economy, big population, they're ranked 142 out of 144, right? So in the same
very inconsistent.
So throughout the continent is a continuum of that. So like you said, very inconsistent. So how do you drive that consistency? And I think having companies such as American companies who make Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is huge. I have to answer questionnaires 3 times a year, right? I have audits on Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. All American companies have to abide by that. In addition to that, all of the corporate governance that comes in to play when you enter a country in Africa, like Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Angola. Some of those countries, you bring in a Ford operation or another American multinational operation, and they bring that governance to play, and they start having those conversations with the legislators and the lawmakers.
How do the Americans relate to the Chinese and the grab for the continent?
Well, I think what's interesting is what I was talking to the Minister of Finance for Nigeria, and I asked him that question. I said, how are you embracing the Chinese and the Americans? How do you see the differences? And what he said was, we need them both. We need the Americans because of the stability, the predictability, all the things I mentioned a moment ago. And he said, but we need the Chinese too, because they're aggressive and they're willing to help us in areas where we need help that maybe aren't mainstream. And not what corporations usually think about. So he said there's a place for both.
Do you believe there's a place for both?
I believe there is, yes. And I believe that the American companies are positioned very well because they're focusing on areas of the world in the past that are now showing modest to no growth. Europe, the Americas, even Asia slowing down a bit. Now it's starting to come back up, but look at India has been having its problems. So suddenly Africa is a place for American companies to land their investment that gives them a great opportunity for return. And so there's a lot more focus, and I think you'll see American companies putting more foreign direct investment in.
I see you, as Ford Southern Africa, are starting to take Africa more seriously. Previously, it was the exporting of trucks into that territory. What is the strategy now? Are you going to be more aggressive? Is it going to be a regional play? Are we going to see a strong play into West Africa with the significant consumer base in that territory?
Well, we've recently announced that we were reorganizing, and we've always had 4 business units, the North America, South America, Europe, and Asia Pacific and Africa. And Africa and the Middle East were actually run by 3 organizations: Southern Africa by Asia Pacific, Northern Africa and the Middle East by Europe, and Central Africa by the United States, North America. And so now we've consolidated that into one business unit. It's the first new business unit we've had in decades. So it really speaks to Ford's focus on the continent and the fact that we believe there's a huge opportunity. We're putting resources in place to grow on the continent. We're still working through how we do that, but the good news is we've got budget, we've got strategies, we've got resources and people that are now going to be focused primarily and uniquely and specifically on Middle East and Africa as a business.
Do you believe that that's where the growth opportunity lies?
I believe, from an automotive standpoint, that the primary driver of unit growth will be Asia Pacific because of its relative position in the economic hierarchy, right? People are closer to be able to afford cars in Asia Pacific than they are in Africa. But I believe Africa is going to be the next economic frontier for automotive. And so whether that's 10 years, 15 years, but it's going to come. And it's going to come when things like food become more precious, when things like minerals take back off, commodities take back off. As the global economy grows, Africa is going to be very much more desirable because of the resources that they hold, not only in the ground, but also agricultural.
Let's move on to a softer part of the discussion. How do you describe your leadership style? It looks as though you're very on the ground, attentive, get involved in the value chain. Am I wrong?
Well, I don't know if I have an aptitude for it, but I certainly have an interest in it. And I've found my leadership style personally is it's difficult for me to make an abstract decision. That what I like to understand is all the details. I like to see it, touch it, smell it. I like to understand the people before I make a decision. So for me, if you walk through I've got 3,000 employees. All of them have met me, and I think the big thing that difference, not necessarily a difference, but a strength that I believe I have is caring about people. So every decision I make, I mean, we always say people are our most important asset, but do we really act that way? I think a lot of good leaders do, and that's what I try to pattern my leadership style on is how does it affect the people? How can I leverage our staffs and our capabilities to the greatest extent? And ultimately it boils down, the only differentiation we have is really our people.
You've also lived all over the world. How does South Africa itself compare?
Well, I could talk about that in 2 different ways. One is from a business perspective and one is from a personal perspective.
Let's try the personal perspective here.
Yeah, the personal perspective, myself and my family love it here. My whole family came here with me. It was a tough sell to get them to come here because all they knew about South Africa is what they see on CNN.
You thought maybe lions are roaming in the street.
Lions are roaming in the street and people running around, with crime is a big issue. But once we got here, we found it to be every bit as livable as America. You do have to be a little bit more diligent when but that's not a bad thing either. The weather is fantastic. There's something to be said about 350 days of sunshine. As far as your personal
Is your family settled in the schooling system?
Yep, we actually go to private American International School of Johannesburg, which is a great school. My wife and I both serve as board and on the parent board and on the school board. So we try to bring what we learned from the Asian international schools here to help this school maybe change its focus, raise its game a little bit, which I think it's moving in the right direction. We're very happy with the school. And then from a professional standpoint, you think about the businesses, how many South African businesses had become multinational giants, right? From this tiny little economy at the bottom of the world. So there's a lot of entrepreneurship. There's people that are risk takers. The opportunities that brings to business and to manufacturing is fantastic.
Does South Africa deserve the reputation of the gateway to Africa?
I think for South Africa to deserve that moniker really depends on how it leverages its opportunities and its strengths. So one of the things that I see is Africa is a very fragmented economy, and somebody needs to pull it together, right? And the African Union is trying to do that. There's 7 or 8 different operational trading communities within the African continent. I think it's up to Africa to try to homogenize the market, and because it's 26 individual markets
and if we don't do it quickly, Nigeria's going to do it.
Right, or somebody will. Somebody will grasp this opportunity, right? And I think South Africa is uniquely positioned to be the ones that grasp it because of what they've been through. I mean, look at what South Africa went through in the 80s and 90s, and they've come out of it, shining as far as an economy goes. And so they need to take that experience and look at what some of the other countries have done, going through that same experience. It didn't come out of it with that same level of success.
Jeff, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you very much for your time. Jeff Nemeth is the CEO and President of Ford Southern Africa.